Today we're here to talk about how to move from altered states to altered traits, hacking the flow state to accelerate human evolution. In the last 50 years in particular, we have experienced what comparative religious scholar Mircea Eliade used to call techniques of ecstasy. And in that category, which remained more or less constant for thousands of years, in the last 50 years, we've experienced a step function in increase of potency and efficacy in three major areas: technology, psychology, and pharmacology. So think back to the early 60s for a minute. Think back to Bob Dylan playing an acoustic guitar in the Greenwich coffee shops, right? Now imagine him plugging in at the Newport Folk Festival, able not just to reach dozens and hundreds, but thousands. And now Hendrix channeling the Vietnam War through an upside-down Fender Strat at Woodstock to 80,000, and now 250,000 candy-flipping high schoolers at Electric Daisy Carnival getting their brainwaves entrained at 140 beats a minute. Potent, unprecedented. In the realm of psychology, think back to the Organization Man and Betty Homemaker coming out of World War II. Fast forward to the 60s, Fritz Perl at Esalen, pillow-thumping Gestalt sessions. 70s, radical encounter est groups. 80s and 90s, Tony Robbins, Giant Within, Make Bank, and Date Hot Chicks. All the way to today with Oprah and Eckhart, non-dual awareness beamed out to suburban housewives by the millions. We have more room to roam, more room to consider who we are, who we might become. And lastly, the most obvious, pharmacology. From the 50s and the realm of Mother's Little Helper, barbiturates and Valium, to today, we've entered a world of full-on psychopharmacology. Choose the person you'd like to be and pop that pill. Oxytocin, Prozac nation. And despite all of those benefits, despite all of that advance, right, we're no further than we've always been. It's easier than ever to get high. And it's as hard as it's always been to stay that way. So what's up with that? What's up? Why do we keep pulling an Icarus and falling back to Earth? Well, a helpful analogy is to think of our self systems like a colander. And when there's enough flow going into that leaky bucket, temporarily, it fills up. For a moment, we experience the wholeness. We experience the wisdom. We experience the insights, and we say, ah, yes, I remember what I forgot. But when the pill wears off, when the workshop ends, when the DJs turn on the floodlights after the final encore, and the spigot of that peak experience ceases, the perforations in our vessel take precedent, and by Monday morning, we're back more or less to where we were. Now, what do most of us do most of the time? We say, ah, yeah, let me go get some more of that. We go try to ring the bell again and again. We become bliss junkies. We become hooked on the state without ever raising the stage. But what if just for a moment we could entertain the project of turning our colanders into chalices? What if we can use those peak experiences to make us whole, to render us holy? What might we do with just one drop? What could we do with the rest? And in Houston Smith's immortal words, might we begin then to transform our passing illuminations into abiding light? So for the balance of our time, we're going to talk about three quick things. If you leave with nothing else, I'd love you to remember these. The first is that flow is universal. It's accessible to all of us everywhere. The next is that for the first time in human history, it's actually hackable. And lastly, once we know what to do with it, and once we can turn it on, we can leverage it to accelerate our learning and to do more good things in a world that sorely needs it. Part 1. So the lingo is endless, the experience is timeless. Abe Maslow called it peak experience. Jim Fixx called it the runner's high. Phil Jackson, the coach of the Bulls and the Lakers, calls it getting in the zone. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, all the other jazz musicians called it being in the pocket, right? Time slows down, the self vanishes. Action and awareness, the beer and the doer merge, and you drop into flow. It can last seconds, it can last a minute, it might even last an hour if we're lucky, but that blink of time becomes a lodestone, becomes our anchor. We spend the rest of our lives looking for it again. So let's cut to the chase. How can we hack it? How can we get more of it? Okay? So the first thing, there's one of the most invaluable qualities of the flow state is the loss of self-awareness. Our critical, waking, neurotic inner Woody Allen goes offline. Hallelujah. And just for that moment, we get to breathe and be without thinking and critiquing. The technical term for that, what's actually going on when they put elite athletes in fMRI machines, is called transient hypofrontality. Transient meaning it's just around for a little while, hypo, not a lot of, and frontality, this complex neocortical hardware that's in the front of our dome piece. For just a while, it goes offline, and it's like shutting a bunch of really complicated programs on our browser. The central processor runs smoother, runs faster. The exact opposite of Aldous Huxley's doors of perception, rather than the nozzle expanding, are actually our aperture focuses. And we get richer, cleaner information processing. But the problem, the paradox, is how can we use our complex waking self to get rid of our complex waking self? Right? Let's just put a bullet in the narcissistic, pop psych, new age self-help movement once and for all, right? And like Brer Rabbit, right? Tangling with that tar baby, the more you struggle with it, the stucker you get. So let's instead lead the witness. Let's turn the entire biopsychosocial self system up to 11 and then see who's home. And what that might look like is if we break down, and I don't know how many of you can see this screen, but these are essentially levers and knobs we can play with, rather than just saying, are we there yet? Am I there yet? Am I in my happy place, right? Let's just look at the levels of development and the various capacities we have, and let's optimize them. So, for instance, rather than me being stressed out with rapid, shallow chest breathing, pumping cortisol and adrenaline, having an erratic heart state, and being in an unresourceful brainwave state, running mental maps and models that are clusters of cul-de-sacs and error messages. What if I instead learned to optimize all of them? What if I moved my brainwaves into alpha and theta? And actually they've done studies on Laird Hamilton and other extreme action sports athletes. And this whole 10,000 hours of practice, how many of you guys have heard of that lately? I blame Malcolm Gladwell for that one, right? It's a fiction, okay? How many of us can actually stick at something like that for 10 bloody years, half a day, every day? Think of we love that story, right? It's like Protestant work ethic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of stuff, and we tell our kids all about it, and we tell our employees, but it's crap, right? I mean, look at the casualties, right? Littering on the side of the road of the people who make that trade-off. The Tiger Woods and the Lance Armstrongs, the Tiger Moms, and the bulimic prima ballerinas, the tortured artists. right? Practice is hard. It's really hard. And if we can use instead ways to optimize our self-system, we can have more resources more often. And what happens with these action sports athletes, that's what separates the good from the great, is that the great are actually able, right there in the maw of the biggest wave in the world, are able to drop into theta states, right? Meditative states, the states that normally you see Tibetan yogis in. They're able to drop there and camp out and wait for these little bursts of gamma waves that render them with the information they need at precisely the right time to shoot the barrel and to stay alive. That's the difference. So this 10,000 hours is peddled as a wildly egalitarian thing. The reality is the people that win, the people that succeed, have learned to master states of being first. And we can too. So lastly, the so what, right? I mean, it's, what we've talked about so far is still about my own personal experience. But I think the biggest impact and the most exciting possibility we have here is what might we be able to do with flow if we're able to cultivate it intentionally. So Stephen Kotler is also a founder of the Flow Genome Project, and last year he co-wrote the book Abundance with Peter Diamandis. How many of you have either heard of the book or seen Peter's TED Talk? Great. So in a nutshell, they're basically arguing that, hey, while it looks like there may be a train wreck ahead, right, and Daniel and others have talked about all of the factors we're aware of today, there's also a really solid chance that the future is going to turn out better than we think, that we're going to have the chance to fix this in time. But the reality is that's not a layup, right? Best-selling books notwithstanding, right? We could catch that wave, and we could ride it triumphantly all the way into the shore, or that wave could catch us, pick us up, and dump us on the reefs of unintended consequences. So the only way we have a chance of making that drop and catching that wave of abundance is to learn faster. And flow helps us do that. And here's how. So Phil Zimbardo, he's a Stanford professor. Anybody heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment, right? Where the little kids each get a marshmallow and like, bird in the hand, Jill just bungs that thing straight in, but all work and no play. Jack says, I'm gonna sit on mine, I'm gonna wait for my double, right? And all the studies show that Jack does much better in his life. But the problem is neither the ant nor the grasshopper really works. They've both got their drawbacks and pathologies. If I go with instant gratification, I'm never around to build something lasting. If I'm never in the present, all of the baubles and trinkets I acquire are for naught. But something that's beautiful about flow states is that they're autotelic. And autotelic is just a fancy word for it feels really good. It has its own meaning. And when we can do that in the present, we can follow instant gratification. We can follow our desire to feel most alive. And at the same time, they can take us on a path to mastery. And when we apply that to the rising billion around the world, and we take them from caste and class and obligation, and we can unlock them to mobility, possibility, and innovation, what might we be able to do then? So in closing, let this be the beginning of a third great awakening in American culture, this time balancing the ecstatic with the empiric. Let us reverse engineer our rarest and most precious moments of grace and insight, and let us harness them to the broader project of innovation, collaboration, and accelerated evolution. We should not ask what the world needs. We should ask what makes us come alive and go and do that. Because what the world needs is more of us, all of us, to come alive. Thank you.